The year is 1346 BCE. The Nile is at its lowest ebb, the desert wind cutting lines of sand across the floor of a city still being born. Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, is nothing but half-finished stone and dust. Workers in linen kilts drag blocks across planks, their chants swallowed by the open sky. The sun disk, Aten, blazes overhead. At the center of this new capital walks a tall, thin man in a pleated robe. His skull appears elongated, his lips drawn tight as though carrying a secret. This is Akhenaten. Once known as Amenhotep IV, he was a prince raised under the heavy canopy of Egypt's old gods, Ammonius, Osiris, Isis, Horus. Inside the palaces of Thebes, he watched priests burn incense to dozens of deities, watched offerings fill the temple granaries, watched the gold flow into the hands of a priesthood as powerful as any army. He had been the quiet son, overshadowed by his father Amenhotep III, who presided over a stable and glittering empire. Overshadowed by his older brothers, by generals, by the monumental statues carved for other men. Yet in the private gardens of the palace, he would stand alone at dawn, watching the first rays of sunlight strike the river. Something inside him, call it devotion, call it obsession, grew around a single, blazing image, the Aten disk. By the time he became pharaoh, that obsession had hardened into purpose. He looked at Egypt's temples and saw not faith, but a rival power base. He saw the wealth of Ammonius' priesthood eclipsing the palace treasury. He saw rituals multiplying, gods fracturing into hundreds of faces, and he believed the truth was being lost. To Akhenaten there was only one source, one life-giver, one light. All else was shadow. Now, on this dusk in Akhetaten, he walks through his city as if through a prophecy fulfilled. Each avenue aligns with the rising sun. Each temple is open to the sky so that no image of a god can obscure the Aten. The walls are plastered with hymns to the disk and carvings of the royal family under its rays. Intimate, almost vulnerable scenes that break with 2,000 years of Egyptian convention. He pauses at the edge of the great temple of the Aten, still little more than a skeleton of columns. The city behind him echoes with the hammering of masons. In his mind, the vision is complete, a nation freed from the weight of countless idols, guided by a single divine light radiating through him, the Pharaoh. But beyond these city walls, the old Egypt still breathes. In Thebes, Ammonius priests whisper of blasphemy. In Memphis, the army wonders why their king builds temples instead of garrisons. In foreign capitals, ambassadors write frantic letters asking where their Egyptian protector has gone. The future of the empire trembles in a heat haze. Standing there, hands lifted toward the Aten, Akhenaten begins to plan his next step, one act of royal will that will shatter tradition more completely than any war. In a single stroke, he will try to erase not only Egypt's gods, but Egypt's memory of them. And with that decree, the heretic pharaoh will throw open a struggle that will decide whether his revolution becomes Egypt's future or its first great erasure. The sun dips lower over Akhetaten, the unfinished city bathed in molten copper light. Akhenaten stands before the rising pylons of his temple, but our view drifts backward, past the desert winds, past the new capital, deep into the memory of an empire at its height. This is Thebes in the time of Amenhotep III, father of Akhenaten. Here the Nile is broad and glittering, the temples heavy with incense, their flagpoles crowned with gold tips that catch the morning sun. Every dawn begins with the same ritual, priests of Ammonius stepping out from the hypostyle hall at Karnak, lifting offerings toward a god no one sees, but everyone fears. Ammonius, the hidden one, rules Egypt as surely as Pharaoh. His temples stretch from Nubia to the Delta. His priests control the flow of grain, papyrus, and gold mined in the eastern deserts. Temples function not only as houses of worship, but as banks and warehouses. They lend silver, store food, collect taxes. In theory, Pharaoh is the high priest of every cult. In practice, the cult of Ammonius holds a parallel treasury larger than the royal one. At Karnak, the priest's power is visible in sheer scale. Walls 30 feet thick, obelisks cut from single blocks of granite, processional avenues lined with sphinxes. Every major festival, the Opet festival, the beautiful feast of the valley, draws thousands into the streets. The god is carried in a golden bark, veiled by curtains, his presence hidden from mortal eyes. Behind the spectacle flows a torrent of wealth: meat, grain, linen, incense, wine, all redistributed through the temple system. To be Egyptian in the 14th century BCE is to live inside a cosmic contract. The gods uphold Ma'at, cosmic order, and Pharaoh upholds the gods. If one fails, the world collapses. Floods come late. Crops die. Foreign enemies swarm the borders. This is not superstition, but the binding logic of an entire civilization. Within this system, gods multiply. Each city has its own patron deity. Each god fuses with another in theological mergers. Ammonius Ra, Tasokar Osiris. The pantheon is fluid, sprawling, endlessly adaptable. Ordinary people accept this as reality because it is reality. Every household has its shrine. Every harvest its offering. The divine saturates every act from birth to burial. Against this backdrop, a single god vision is not just heresy. It is an existential threat to the entire machinery of power. To strip Egypt of its gods is to strip its priests of their offices, its festivals of their meaning, and its people of their cosmic safety net. Yet even at this height of polytheism, new ideas swirl at the edges. Solar cults dedicated to Ra rise and fall with dynasties. Foreign merchants bring strange amulets and stories from the Levant, Mesopotamia, and Mitanni. The empire's borders are porous to both gold and thought. Into this world is born a prince named Amenhotep, later Akhenaten. While the official scribes teach him hymns to Ammonius and Horus, other tutors whisper different verses: the great hymn to the Aten, older solar invocations from Heliopolis, even fragments of foreign texts carried by diplomats and envoys. Flashback to a boy standing in the peristyle court of the palace of Malkata, sunlight pouring over columns painted with blue lotus. He watches a priest of Ra unroll a papyrus showing the sun's path across the sky. He listens to an old astronomer from Byblos explain how distant lands worship a single sun creator. He hears rumors of kings in Canaan and Babylon who speak of one supreme deity above all others. To young Amenhotep, these are not contradictions, but keys. He senses that behind the masks of Egypt's many gods might be one unifying light. The image of the Aten, a sun disk with hands reaching down, lodges in his mind like a seed. Meanwhile, his father, Amenhotep III, tries to keep balance. He expands Ammonius temples, but also elevates Aten, perhaps to dilute the priesthood's power. He commissions scarabs praising his divine birth and solar connection. The boy sees the tug-of-war between throne and temple, between old gods and a rising solar cult. By his teenage years, Amenhotep witnesses the double face of Egyptian religion, its grandeur and its danger. The priests of Ammonius wield political leverage over royal decrees. Temple treasuries can outspend the palace. Even Pharaoh must perform rituals to maintain legitimacy, kneeling before statues carved by men. To a sensitive, ambitious mind, this might feel like a cage. In the private quarters of the palace, foreign tutors speak more openly. They tell of Mitanni treaties sealed under one sky god. They recite hymns from Ugarit praising a universal creator. They teach mathematics and astronomy that chart the sun's precise journey, knowledge that undercuts the priest's mystery. And they teach him something else. Words and images can create reality. If the king renames a city, erases a god's name, or orders new hymns, the people will obey. What is written in stone lasts longer than flesh. We cut back to Thebes during the festival of Opet. The god Ammonius' bark glides down the Nile from Karnak to Luxor Temple, crowds roaring, incense rising like storm clouds. In the throng stands young Amenhotep. He watches the golden curtain sway around the hidden god. He notices the power of spectacle, the way a veiled figure can command a nation's all without ever showing its face. Later that night, in his study, he sketches the Aten disk. No veil, no animal form, just the sun itself with hands stretching out. No priest needed, no curtain, only light. The seeds of revolution germinate quietly. He learns that the ancient solar cult at Heliopolis once taught a nearly monotheistic doctrine under the high priests of Ra. He reads about Akhenaten, obscure prophets of the sun, whose names have been forgotten or erased. He begins to imagine a new Egypt where the king mediates directly between one god and all people. But for now, he keeps these ideas hidden. The court is a labyrinth of spies and rival factions. The Ammonius priesthood controls oracles, festivals, and the wealth of half the country. No one challenges them openly and survives. In this flashback Egypt, religion is not a private faith but the central nervous system of power. Temples own farmland. Temples build ships. Temples store the harvest. When a high priest speaks, governors listen. When the god's oracle pronounces judgment, laws change. Even the army swears oaths to the gods before Pharaoh. This is why historians later call the Ammonius priesthood a state within a state. Some modern writers call it, more bluntly, the Vatican of the Nile, a vast, religious bureaucracy guarding tradition, wealth, and cosmic legitimacy. It is an institution so deeply woven into Egypt's identity that to oppose it is to oppose reality itself. As the flashback fades, we return to the unfinished city of Akhetaten. Akhenaten stands on a high terrace looking east toward the horizon. He remembers the processions, the priests, the secret lessons from foreign astronomers. All of it converges into a single conviction. The old system is corrupt, bloated, and blind. Here lies the twist. The Akhetaten cult is not only a spiritual reform, but a political revolution. By abolishing Egypt's many gods and elevating a single solar deity, Akhenaten can strip the Ammonius priesthood of its wealth, break their power, and centralize the kingdom under his throne. It is theology as strategy. But he also believes, genuinely, fervently, that the Akhetaten is the source of all life, the true God behind the masks. This mix of faith and power makes him unpredictable, perhaps unstoppable. In the silence of his new city, he touches the hieroglyph carved into fresh limestone, Akhenaten's rays reaching to the royal family. Around him stand builders and scribes, none yet aware that they are part of the greatest religious experiment in Egyptian history. He closes his eyes and sees Thebes burning in the sunlight, its temples empty, its priests dispersed. A single god above all others. A new order. And soon, very soon, he will risk everything to bring that vision into being. Next, Akhenaten will make his move. Temples will close. Gods will vanish from their shrines. And the pharaoh of one god will test how far an empire built on many can be pushed before it breaks. The dawn over Akhetaten is white and merciless. The city that only months ago was a skeleton of pylons now stands lined with banners bearing the sun disk. Couriers race from the royal palace, their scrolls sealed with the cartouche of Akhenaten. Across Egypt, temple administrators, governors, and scribes break the wax and read the orders aloud. What those orders say is simple, but nothing like it has ever been said before. The worship of Ammonius is no longer sanctioned. Temples dedicated to the old gods are to close. Offerings, tithes, and festival taxes are to be redirected to the Akhetaten. All priests of Ammonius must vacate their offices and report their inventories to the royal treasury. No war chariots roll. No armies march. Yet an empire built on 1,000 shrines trembles as if struck by an earthquake. In Thebes, the great Karnak complex falls silent. Priests who once moved in glittering processions now huddle inside chambers whispering about exile and rebellion. Nobles who have endowed temples for generations suddenly see their names erased from donor lists. Merchants who supply incense and temple bread find their contracts canceled overnight. In Akhetaten, Akhenaten stands at the center of a courtyard with his court around him. He wears the blue crown of Pharaoh but also the simple robes of a priest. Nefertiti stands beside him, her tall crown catching the sunlight, the 6 royal daughters lined behind like living icons. Together they lift their hands to the Akhetaten disc carved above the altar, a ritual no one has ever seen before. From this moment forward, the Akhetaten will have no statues, no veiled bark carried in procession. Its temples will have no roof. Sunlight itself will be the only canopy, and Akhenaten, pharaoh of Egypt, will be its sole intermediary. The priests call it blasphemy. The army calls it instability. But Akhenaten calls it truth. In the shadows of Thebes, a different ritual unfolds. Former high priests of Ammonius sit in a closed chamber lit by flickering oil lamps. Scrolls and ledgers lie stacked on the floor, the records of their wealth, their land, their influence. all of it about to be seized. They speak of omens, of conspiracies, of a pharaoh gone mad. Some urge revolt, others counsel patience, believing no king can hold Egypt without the gods. Letters begin to cross the desert under sealed covers. Governors in the Delta and Nubia write to one another, unsure which side to take. The Amarna tablets, which modern archaeologists will one day unearth, capture the edge of this anxiety. Foreign kings begging for Egyptian troops while Egypt turns inward, consumed by a war of the unseen. Meanwhile, the acts of iconoclasm begin quietly but spread like fire. Across temple walls and tomb inscriptions, work crews arrive with chisels and mallets. The name of Ammonius is gouged out of reliefs. Cartouches once filled with Ammonius Ra now stand empty or are recarved with the Aten disc. Statues of Ammonius are toppled or walled off in plaster, hidden like criminals. Inscriptions referring to the gods in plural are edited to the gods singular. It is the first time in Egypt's history that memory itself is being rewritten in real time. Imagine standing in Karnak, watching a crew hammer at a stone relief that has stood for centuries. Each strike erases a letter of Ammonius' name. Dust floats through the shafts of light. The priests mutter curses under their breath, but none dare lift a weapon. This is not an invading army. This is their own pharaoh's decree. In Akhetaten's workshops, scribes prepare new hymns to Aten. Artisans carve reliefs showing Akhenaten and Nefertiti under the sun disk, the rays ending in tiny hands offering angst to their noses. Royal propaganda spreads the image, the pharaoh and his queen as living conduits of the one god. No other priests needed. No hidden mysteries. The sunlight itself as scripture. But beneath this luminous theology runs a darker current. With the closure of Ammonius temples, Egypt's largest employer is dissolved. Thousands of temple workers are suddenly destitute. Caravan routes go unguarded. Outposts in Syria and Nubia send desperate dispatches asking for gold, grain, soldiers, and get no reply. Power begins to shift in ways no one can yet map. Nefertiti emerges in this period as more than consort. Some stele show her smiting enemies, wearing the blue crown, or offering to Aten without Akhenaten present. Rumors swirl, she may be co-regent or poised to succeed him. Inside the palace, factions form around different royal daughters, foreign wives, and possible heirs. The court becomes a maze of loyalty and betrayal, like a slow-motion coup hidden beneath robes and incense. Akhenaten himself grows more remote. He stops attending traditional ceremonies, appears only at open-air Aten altars, and issues proclamations in an increasingly mystical tone. Some of his own officials begin to whisper that the pharaoh is not merely replacing the gods, but trying to become one. The mood in Egypt turns surreal. Merchants paint over old god symbols on their shop fronts. Artists shift from timeless profiles to the fluid, elongated Amarna style. Courtiers publicly praise the Aten while privately keeping household shrines to other deities. The priesthood of Ammonius moves its treasures into hidden caches or smuggles them upriver. And yet for a time, the revolution holds. Taxes flow into the Aten temples. Construction accelerates in Akhetaten. The royal family is depicted in scenes of tender intimacy, holding their daughters under the rays of the sun disk. To outsiders it seems a golden age. To insiders it feels like standing on a fault line before the quake. We cut to a night scene. A small temple in Thebes, its doors sealed. Inside, by torchlight, a group of priests swears an oath to preserve Ammonius' name in secret writings even as it is erased from public monuments. They hide scrolls in false walls, bury statues under temple floors, send coded messages to allies in Nubia and the Levant. It is the first counter-revolution against monotheism, fought not with swords, but with memory. At the same time, in Akhetaten's main hall, Akhenaten dictates a new hymn to the Aten. The scribes read pen scratches across papyrus. You are the sole God, like whom there is no other. You created the earth according to your desire. His voice trembles not with fear, but with ecstasy. For him, this is not politics, but revelation. Yet even as he writes, the cost of this revelation mounts. Egypt's frontiers weaken. Its diplomats grow desperate. The people whisper of plague. The priests whisper of divine vengeance. Nobles consider who might succeed a king who has set himself against eternity. The tension crests in a single image. Akhenaten, at the altar of the Aten, sunlight pouring over his elongated features, while at the same time a chisel hammers Ammonius' name out of the stones of Karnak. Two acts happening at once, one of creation, one of erasure. And still he is not finished. Closing the temples and erasing the gods is only the first phase, because Akhenaten will go further than anyone imagined. The Nile bends like a ribbon of copper under the midday sun. Barges loaded with limestone blocks drift across the current, their sails taut against a steady desert wind. On the far bank, where no city has ever stood, the horizon shimmers with heat. This is not a temple complex or a new wing of Thebes. This is virgin desert, a blank page on which a pharaoh will write his new world. On the bluffs above the river, Akhenaten stands with surveyors and scribes. His hand sweeps across the barren plain. Here, he says, the Aten rose for me. Steely marked the boundary lines of his dream, cut into rock with inscriptions claiming the site was chosen by the sun disk itself. From this moment forward, Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, will be Egypt's new capital, and Thebes will be left to its gods and its memories. Construction begins like a military campaign. The king's barges bring stone from the quarries. Overseers measure with cords, hammer wooden stakes into the sand. Columns rise from trenches like stalks sprouting overnight. Hundreds of craftsmen, soldiers, and foreign captives work shoulder to shoulder. The air fills with a constant rhythm, the creak of sledges, the crack of whips, the chant of work songs. Aten gives life, Aten gives light. They sing as they haul blocks across the Nile. Open-air temples, palaces, and government offices emerge from the desert in geometric order. Unlike the shadowed halls of Karnak, these new buildings have no roofs. Sunlight floods every corner. Courtyards open directly to the sky, columns painted with palm fronds, walls plastered with hymns to the Aten. It is an architecture designed not to contain the divine, but to expose it. Yet as stone meets sun, memory lingers. Artisans who once carved Ammonius' hidden shrines now paint rays of the sun disk reaching down to the royal family. In the heat of the day, some murmur to each other about the gods they left behind. They shape the new hieroglyphs with steady hands but recall the old images, jackals, hawks, ibis, and crocodiles, that filled their childhood temples. Flashback to a middle-aged sculptor, one of the finest in Thebes. He remembers chiseling Osiris seated on his throne, cloaked in green, wrapped like a mummy. Now he carves Akhenaten with Nefertiti and their daughters under a disk of light, their bodies long and curved, their skulls elongated. He cannot tell whether he's witnessing a new age of freedom or being forced to carve his own heresy into stone. In the workers' camp, rumor drifts like dust. Some say the king has gone mad. Others say he is a prophet chosen by the sun itself. Foreign laborers, Syrians, Nubians, Canaanites, carry their own small amulets of distant gods, hiding them under their mats at night. Egyptian peasants debate in whispers. Is this city a path to salvation or a curse that will bring famine? Still, the work goes on. Each morning, the royal family rides out to inspect progress. Akhenaten stops to bless the workers, handing out food and beer. Nefertiti, radiant in her crown, gives gold collars to favored artisans. Under their gaze, new art flourishes, scenes of the royal family playing with their children, worshipping Aten without intermediaries, scenes of ordinary life. Bakers, fishermen, scribes, all under the sun disk. It is a startling shift from the rigid, eternal art of earlier dynasties. At night, the desert cools. Workers gather around fires, singing old hymns to Hathor, Ta, and Ammonius in hushed voices, then glancing over their shoulders to be sure no overseer hears. They stare at the stars, wondering if those gods still listen. They speak of omens. The Nile's flood a little lower this year. The army slow to answer calls from foreign garrisons. The priests of Ammonius still powerful in Thebes. Inside the palace, Akhenaten reviews plans for a great temple of the Aten, larger than anything yet built in Egypt. He orders an entire administrative district to be relocated from Thebes to Akhetaten. Bureaucrats, scribes, and merchants uproot their families and follow him into the desert. It is not just a city, it is a forced migration of Egypt's elite. The psychological toll deepens. Families who have lived for generations in Thebes now find themselves in a half-built city of white limestone and blinding sunlight. Priests of lesser gods lose their posts. Children grow up learning only hymns to the Aten. Markets sell Aten amulets instead of statuettes of Horus or Batet. Daily life becomes a living sermon of the one god. Memory flashbacks pepper the city like ghosts. A mason pauses mid-chisel remembering the cool, shadowed halls of Karnak, where incense once curled up to hidden statues. A scribe recalls copying the Book of the Dead in hieratic script. Now he writes only the Aten hymn on fresh papyrus. An old woman tending the work camp kitchen whispers a prayer to Isis before pouring beer for the laborers. Akhenaten, meanwhile, frames every step as revelation. He insists Akhetaten is not simply his idea, but Aten's will made manifest in stone. He orders boundaries steely carved with his own words, that this city is for the Aten alone, and no other god will ever have a temple here. His language grows grander, more mystical. In public ceremonies he appears less as king and more as high priest, offering to Aten on behalf of all humanity. Yet cracks appear. Letters from governors on the empire's edges go unanswered. Tribute from vassal states arrives late or not at all. The priesthood of Ammonius, though stripped of income, still holds loyalty among millions of Egyptians who grew up under their gods. Whispers spread that the old deities are angry, that the Nile will dry, that the Aten cannot protect Egypt's borders. One night in the half-built palace, Nefertiti stands at a balcony looking over the city. Thousands of oil lamps glow in the workers' camp. She hears distant singing, not the new hymns to Aten, but an old lullaby to Hathor. She says nothing. In the court below, Akhenaten writes another decree to ban the making of idols. The chasm between royal vision and popular faith widens silently. Still, the city rises. Temples stretch like white ribs against the sky. Palaces with open roofs, pools reflecting the sun. Streets laid out in radiant lines converging on the great temple. From the river, Akhetaten appears like a mirage, a vision of a new world. To visitors arriving by boat, it must seem as if Egypt has reinvented itself overnight. But behind the limestone facades lies unease. Merchants hoard grain. Soldiers grumble about delayed pay. Artisans carve Aten's rays by day, but mutter old prayers by night. The very brightness of the city throws its shadows farther. And Akhenaten himself changes. His speeches become more absolute, his decrees more sweeping. He begins to describe himself as the only one who knows the Aten, the living bridge between God and earth. He tells his courtiers that the old gods are nothing but shadows cast by the one true light. He orders the first inspections to ensure no secret shrines remain in private homes. From a distance, it looks like a utopia built on sun and faith. Up close, it feels like a kingdom balanced on glass. The capital is new, but the questions are old. How much can you erase before the past comes back? The workers wake each dawn to another day of hauling stone, singing hymns, carving sun discs. They cannot know that they are part of a story the world will later call the Amarna Revolution. A story as short-lived as it is brilliant. For now they know only the glare of the sun, the ache of their muscles, and the uncertainty of whether they are building Egypt's salvation or its ruin. Because Akhenaten has not only built a city in the desert, he has built a stage. And soon, on that stage, the true drama will begin. The midday sun slants through open courtyards, flooding Akhetaten with light so fierce it bleaches even color from stone. In the heart of the royal palace, where columns rise like stalks of papyrus, a quieter drama unfolds. One etched not on papyrus or stele, but on the bodies and faces of a family who will become Egypt's strangest icons. Nefertiti enters first, tall, poised, wearing her blue crown like a blade of lapis against the sky. 6 daughters follow in a rustle of linen and gold bangles, their heads tilted upward as if already trained to receive Aten's rays. Akhenaten meets them at the far end of the hall, his thin frame swaying in the heat, his eyes glowing with private certainty. Together they stand as the living image of a new divine order, or so the carvings say. On walls across the city, artisans carve scenes that would have scandalized any earlier court. The pharaoh kissing his wife's lips, holding his daughters on his knees, Nefertiti smiting Egypt's enemies or riding a chariot like a warrior. Where past kings appear alone, rigid, eternal, Akhenaten's family appears in flowing, almost theatrical intimacy. The figures are elongated, heads swelling into ovals, limbs soft and curved. No more timeless profiles. No more distant gods. This is a family portrayed as flesh, as feeling, under the rays of a single sun. It is also propaganda. Each scene shows Aten's rays ending in tiny hands offering angst to the royal noses. Life flowing not to the people, but to the pharaoh, his queen, and their daughters. As if to say, the divine spark rests here, in this bloodline, and nowhere else. The effect on Egypt's psyche is jarring. In a culture where the king is father and the gods are unapproachable, the sudden elevation of Nefertiti and the royal children feels almost like an experiment. The queen's face is everywhere, carved into temple walls, painted on shrine panels, stamped on small household amulets. Some courtiers begin calling her Mistress of Two Lands, in a title nearly equal to Pharaoh. Others whisper darker things, that she is the true power behind the Aten cult, that Akhenaten is merely the visionary, while she is the tactician. Inside the palace, Nefertiti's influence is unmistakable. She appears at major offerings, reads decrees, even strikes the smiting pose traditionally reserved for the king. Her daughters, too, are displayed in public ceremonies, unusual for royal children, as if their very presence affirms the new religion. Flashback to the old palace at Thebes, a young Nefertiti learning statecraft under the shadow of Amenhotep III's court, watching how priests and generals jockey for favor. She grows into a woman who knows how to navigate ritual and power, who understands the stakes of reform. When Akhenaten begins his revolution, she is not simply a consort but a partner, or perhaps a rival, in remaking Egypt. Scribes and Akhetaten record joint decrees under both their names. Some steely show Nefertiti wearing the blue crown of kingship, her name enclosed in cartouches like a pharaoh. Others depict her standing alone before Aten while Akhenaten is absent. The boundary between queen and king blurs. This is where speculation begins. Did Akhenaten elevate Nefertiti as co-ruler to stabilize his revolution? Or did she seize the role herself, ensuring continuity if his experiment failed? Was the royal family, with its open displays of intimacy, its exaggerated art, its elevation of female power, a theological experiment designed to show the unity of divine and human? Or was it a political maneuver to center all legitimacy inside a single household, bypassing the priesthood entirely? Artisans carving the royal family whisper their own theories as they chip limestone. Some think the elongated heads represent a divine mutation, the Aten reshaping the royal bloodline. Others believe it is symbolism, a visual code showing a higher state of consciousness. Few dare say aloud that the figures look frail, even alien. The daughters grow up under this glare. They dance in open courtyards, serve as handmaidens during offerings, appear in endless reliefs. Their names, Akhetaten, 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 become liturgical chants in themselves. Courtiers bow to them as living embodiments of the Aten's race. Yet behind palace walls, servants whisper about palace intrigue, succession struggles, and an empire unraveling beyond the city's gates. Here the plot twists again. Amid the Aten hymns and family portraits, a shadow figure emerges, Smenkhare. Almost nothing about him is certain. Some inscriptions suggest he was a brother or son-in-law. Others hint he was Nefertiti herself under another name, taking the throne as co-regent while Akhenaten still lived. A few scholars argue Smenkhare and Nefertiti were one and the same, a political disguise to ensure continuity of the Aten cult. Then there is Tutankhaten, the boy who would later be known as Tutankhamun, officially one of Akhenaten's sons or nephews, possibly raised within the palace. He carries the Aten in his name, but will one day restore the old gods. Is he the hidden heir, the hostage of the priesthood, or the quiet instrument of a counter-revolution already being planned? Inside Akhenaten's palace, these questions thrum like a pulse. In a sunlit corridor, Nefertiti pauses to watch her daughters playing, her expression unreadable. In another hall, Akhenaten dictates yet another hymn to Aten, his voice rising and falling like a prayer or a command. At night, Scribes copy decrees hinting at new laws restricting private worship even further. Memory flashback. An older artisan sitting on a block at sunset, recalling how in Thebes statues of Ammonius were tended by generations of priests. He wonders if Aten's new temples will endure or crumble as quickly as they rose. He looks at the royal family's images, tender yet strange, and feels the same doubt. What is clear is that the royal household has become the living sermon of Aten. Their bodies, their gestures, their entire domestic life is staged for the public eye. But whether this is faith or theater, no one can say. The emotional complexity deepens. To common Egyptians, the sight of a pharaoh kissing his wife or cradling his child under the rays of Aten is at once humanizing and disturbing. Pharaoh is supposed to be eternal, unchanging, distant. Now he seems vulnerable, almost mortal. If Pharaoh bleeds like them, can he still command the Nile to flood? And yet there is also awe. In a world of rigid hierarchies, the royal family's display of intimacy feels like a promise of a more personal God, a more personal life. Some workers in Akhetaten find themselves inspired, singing new hymns with genuine devotion. Others feel only unease, sensing the old cosmic balance breaking. The palace thus becomes a laboratory. Architecture, art, ritual, family, all tuned to test whether an empire can pivot from many gods to one, from distant king to intimate household. Whether this experiment is meant to save Egypt or to crown Akhenaten and Nefertiti as living embodiments of the sun disk, no one yet knows. And in the shadows of the city's colonnades, whispers grow louder, about the health of the royal daughters, about plague, about strange burials being prepared in the cliffs nearby. Names vanish from court records, new names appear. Smenkare surfaces, then disappears. Tutankhaten waits in the wings. The family at the center of Egypt's new faith may not be the stable core it appears. And soon, the experiment in blood and sunlight will collide with the old world waiting just beyond the city walls. The desert wind no longer smells of fresh-cut stone. It smells of dust and fear. By the 6th year of Akhenaten's reign at Akhetaten, the city gleams white in the sun, but the rest of Egypt is beginning to fray. Letters from the far provinces pile up on royal desks like drifted sand, each one a faint echo of an empire stretching too thin. In Thebes, the priests of Ammonius sit in a forced retirement that feels more like siege. Their temple incomes have been confiscated, their rituals curtailed. Yet they still command loyalty from scribes, farmers, and minor officials across the Nile Valley. Word travels faster than decree. Secret worship continues at household shrines. Priests whisper prophecies of Aten's doom. They write coded letters to allies in Nubia, urging patience. They send hidden couriers up the Nile under the cover of trade caravans. Meanwhile, Egypt's generals pace their empty garrisons. With so much wealth diverted to Akhetaten, military upkeep falters. Chariots go unrepaired, supply lines grow thin. In the north, Hittite envoys test Egypt's resolve, pushing at its vassal states. In the south, Nubian border posts see fewer patrols. The army feels neglected, a dangerous thing in a world built on conquest and tribute. At the center of this is Akhenaten's unshakable focus on theology. Where earlier kings would review troops or fortify border towns, he holds ceremonies in sun-drenched courtyards, issuing hymns instead of marching orders. He seems convinced that Aten's light will protect Egypt more surely than armies. To his generals, this borders on madness. Parallel to these tensions runs a quieter thread of intrigue, espionage, and desperation written on clay. The Amarna tablets, unearthed 3,000 years later, will reveal the pulse of this hidden war. These cuneiform letters from Egypt's allies and vassals plead for help. Send archers, writes Ribhada of Byblos. Our enemies have attacked. Without Egypt's support we are lost. Another from the Levant. The king of Hutti advances. Will Pharaoh not send gold or troops? Are we still under his protection? The tone shifts from loyalty to panic to bitterness as months go by without reply. For these city-states, Egypt has always been the great anchor. Now that anchor feels untethered, drifting toward a god none of them recognize. Inside Akhetaten's palace, a new paranoia grows. Akhenaten orders more inspections of homes to ensure no idols remain. He reduces the ranks of old courtiers, replacing them with younger men loyal only to the Aten cult. Foreign diplomats complain of restricted access. Even some Aten priests begin to murmur about the kingdom's neglect of earthly affairs. Memory flashback. A scribe who once served at Thebes now writes in Akhenaten's chancery. At night he copies letters from desperate governors. Please, my lord, send chariots. Then burns the duplicates under orders, erasing traces of pleas that go unanswered. He wonders if future generations will know how close Egypt came to losing its empire without a single battle. In the marketplaces, the mood is brittle. Merchants hear of caravans raided, outposts overrun. Foreign captives in work gangs whisper news from their homelands. Hittite advances, Canaanite rebellions, Assyrian intrigue. Egypt's once iron grip on its sphere loosens like an untied knot. Yet Akhenaten doubles down. He dedicates more resources to temples, hymns, and open-air rituals. He sponsors new art showing Aten's race stretching beyond Egypt to embrace all lands. He orders the royal family depicted with even more exaggerated features, as though distance from ordinary Egyptians will reinforce their divine uniqueness. Generals meet in back rooms to discuss contingencies. Some consider marching to Thebes to rally the old guard. Others weigh a coup to restore the old gods and stabilize the empire. But no one acts yet. The aura of the throne still holds, even as cracks spider through its base. In Thebes, the old priesthood begins to plant seeds of resistance. They hide sacred texts in tombs, prepare secret caches of gold, and quietly reassure the faithful that this heresy will pass. Some priests adopt a double life, wearing Aten emblems in public while maintaining hidden shrines to Ammonius at night. The religious underground grows stronger as the official cult shines brighter. Meanwhile, the royal household becomes its own arena of suspicion. Nefertiti's role as co-ruler intensifies. Rumors swirl she is negotiating secretly with foreign envoys or the army. Smenkhkare's sudden appearance as possible co-regent confuses the line of succession. Tutankhaten's presence in the palace casts a long shadow toward the future. One scene crystallizes the paranoia. A courier from Byblos arrives at Akhetaten, clothes torn, clutching a clay tablet sealed with a foreign king's mark. He is admitted to a side chamber, where Akhenaten's vizier listens impassively. The courier begs for troops. The vizier says nothing, orders the letter stored, and dismisses him with a ration of bread and beer. Outside the palace, the courier whispers to another envoy, "Egypt no longer hears us." Back inside the palace, Akhenaten prays in a rooftop courtyard at dawn. His face tilts toward the sun, lips moving in a private litany. He seems to believe that by deepening his devotion, he can pull the world back into order. Yet even as he prays, in far-off cities Egypt's statues are being toppled, its allies surrendering to enemies, its tribute drying up. The escalating stakes press inward. Each decree meant to tighten control breeds new opposition. Each unanswered plea from the provinces erodes Egypt's reputation. Each ceremony in the great temple shines brighter but casts deeper shadows beyond the city. Amid all this, a network of spies emerges. Some are loyal to the army, others to the old priesthood, still others to foreign powers. Secret notes slip between hands in the palace corridors. Guards find coded messages tucked under stone blocks. The new capital, built as a sanctuary of sunlight, becomes a labyrinth of shadows. And still the Aten cult demands more. Akhenaten orders another round of erasures, chiseling Ammonius' name even from the tombs of his ancestors. He dispatches inspectors to remove forbidden idols from private homes. In a particularly dramatic move, he cancels certain traditional festivals outright, not just a blow to religion, but to Egypt's social fabric. The tension reaches a point where even loyal officials begin hedging their bets. Some quietly build small shrines to both Aten and Ammonius, a double insurance policy. Others send secret messages to generals in Memphis or to foreign kings, preparing for a future in which Akhenaten might fall. And in the palace itself, beneath the sunlight, another struggle stirs. Who will inherit this fragile experiment? Will it be Nefertiti, whose public power rivals the king's? Smenkhkare, the shadowy co-regent? Or the boy Tutankhaten, whose name already hints at a return to the old gods? Inside the palace walls, another war was brewing. The war over the royal succession. By the 7th year of Akhenaten's reign, Akhetaten is more than a capital. It has become a living canvas, a laboratory of light. The city's white walls throw back the sun with blinding force. Courtyards open to the sky like bowls. Pools mirror the Aten disk overhead. No temple roofs hide the daylight. No shadowy sanctuaries cradle veiled statues. Everything is exposed, radiant, immediate. In this setting, art transforms first. The rigid, eternal forms of earlier Egypt, square shoulders, idealized faces, timeless profiles, dissolve. In their place emerges a style so fluid and personal it startles even the artisans creating it. Scenes of the royal family at play, of courtiers bringing gifts, of musicians tuning lyres under palm trees. Faces wrinkle, bellies round, limbs bend. The Aten's rays reach down in thin lines, ending in open hands, touching each figure with tiny yanks of life. Flashback to a sculptor who began his career carving Osiris statues in Thebes. Now he experiments with soft lines and natural poses. In the cool dawn before work begins, he runs his fingers over unfinished limestone, marveling that he is allowed to capture a king's crooked smile or a queen's neck turned in mid-motion. He wonders if the Aten itself approves, or if this new freedom is simply another mask of control. Another flashback. A painter in a sunlit workshop mixing pigments of crushed malachite and ochre. Under Akhenaten's orders, he paints domestic scenes, the royal daughters playing with ducks, Nefertiti holding a bouquet. Images unthinkable a decade ago. He thinks of the dark, incense-filled chambers of old temples and feels both nostalgia and relief. We used to paint gods hidden in gold, he tells an apprentice. Now we paint the living under the sun. Daily life changes too. Medical papyri discovered later in Amarna hint at new approaches to health and healing. Open-air clinics treat workers with sun exposure, fresh air, and herbal ointments. Royal physicians collect rare plants from the eastern deserts, experimenting with their effects. Whether ordered by Akhenaten or simply coinciding with his reforms, a shift toward natural observation appears. More emphasis on body and environment, less on ritual incantations. Inside the city, courtyards and gardens multiply. Streams and pools cool the air. Homes are built with windows and sun courts rather than dark inner chambers. Children grow up playing in light rather than shadow. Teachers recite hymns to the Aten instead of tales of Osiris's underworld. Daily rituals revolve around dawn and dusk offerings, aligning family life with the sun's rhythm. Subtext hums under all this. Was Akhenaten trying to shift the Egyptian mind itself? From a culture of hidden gods and sealed temples to one of open air and visible light? From fear of dozens of deities, each with complex demands, to intimacy with a single, universal presence? Modern scholars debate this question, but in Amarna the effect is palpable. Workers say they feel freer under the sky, yet more exposed. Priests complain their mystery is gone, yet ordinary people speak of feeling closer to divinity. Children draw Aten discs in the dust instead of animal-headed gods. Even funerary customs begin to change. Tombs in Amarna show less emphasis on the journey to the underworld and more on daily life under the sun. Inscriptions praise the Aten's light rather than Osiris's realm of the dead. Some tombs even lack the Book of the Dead entirely, replacing it with hymns to the Aten. It is as if death itself is being reframed from a dark passage to a continuation of daylight. Yet unease lingers. Some artisans find the naturalism unsettling, the exposure of flaws almost sacrilegious. Some patients in the new clinics still mutter old incantations under their breath. Households keep tiny clay amulets of Bes or Taret tucked behind walls. Even as the experiment blooms, the old Egypt clings like a shadow. We move through a memory flashback montage. A court physician washing a wound with wine rather than reciting a spell. A scribe in a school teaching children to draw the Aten disc before they can write their own names. A gardener planting lotus and papyrus along open channels, aligning them with the solstice. A young girl practicing music in a courtyard, her voice rising directly to the sky rather than echoing off temple ceilings. All of it feels new, but also precarious. One storm, one famine, one plague could wipe it away. In the palace library, Akhenaten reads foreign texts. He studies cuneiform tablets from Babylon and Hittite treaties sealed under the name of a sky god. He listens to emissaries from the Levant describe their own high gods above the pantheon. Perhaps he sees himself not as an anomaly, but as part of a larger current, a drift toward unifying the divine under a single source. He does not say this aloud, but his decrees and his art hint at it. Aten reaching beyond Egypt to shine on all lands. Aten as life-giver to foreign peoples. Aten as something more than a local deity. This is the twist. Without ever naming it, Akhenaten's revolution foreshadows ideas that will echo far beyond Egypt. A single, invisible god of light. A personal relationship to divinity without intermediaries. Morality as alignment with a universal force rather than ritual compliance with many gods. Future centuries will see prophets, teachers, and rulers struggle with the same shift. Some will call it monotheism. Others will call it heresy. But for now it remains a hint, a shimmering possibility hidden inside sunlit courtyards and hymns written in flowing hieratic script. The Aten cult is not a direct ancestor of later monotheisms, but its shape and language send faint ripples forward in time, like a melody half-heard, waiting to be taken up again. And even as Akhenaten dreams of reshaping consciousness itself, his empire crumbles at the edges. Garrison towns rebel. Tribute dries up. The priests of Ammonius weave their counterplot in Thebes. Inside the palace, rival factions whisper around Nefertiti, Smenkhare, and the boy Akhetaten. The experiment in art, medicine, and mysticism may be dazzling, but it is also fragile, balanced on the will of one man. We end on a slow pan across a sunlit workshop. Sculptors chiseling, physicians grinding herbs, scribes copying hymns. Above them the Aten burns white, casting no shadow, but just beyond the frame, darkness gathers. Because the city built to honor one god is also a city vulnerable to one man's fall, and when that fall comes, Egypt will rush to erase the experiment as if it had never happened. The first signs are whispers, not earthquakes. A caravan arrives from Syria with fewer men than it left with. A Nubian outpost sends no tribute. Grain shipments down the Nile thin out. Then come rumors of sickness, a wasting fever creeping through the workers' camp, spreading to the city's elite. In the open-air temples of Aten, where sunlight is supposed to purify all, coughs echo between columns. Akhetaten, once a laboratory of light, becomes a crucible of dread. Workers dig hurried graves at the edges of the desert. Physicians smear herbal pastes on sweating foreheads, whispering hymns under their breath. Some officials begin slipping out at night, fleeing to villages where the old gods are still worshipped. For the first time, Aten's rays feel like a merciless glare rather than a blessing. In Thebes, the priests of Ammonius watch and wait. They had been patient through a decade of humiliation, their incomes seized, their temples closed, their god's name hammered out of stone. Now they interpret the plague as divine vengeance. Quietly, they reassemble their networks, ready to act the moment the pharaoh's grip falters. Inside the palace at Akhetaten, Akhenaten grows thinner. His letters take on a desperate tone. He writes of Aten's light prevailing, but his decrees become more erratic. Food distribution falters. Diplomats go unanswered. Vassal kings defect to the Hittites. Egypt's outer provinces slip away like sand through fingers. The city begins to hollow. Artisans die or leave. Buildings stand unfinished. Courtyards once filled with offerings lie bare. The Aten temples, designed to expose everything, now expose despair. Worshippers still lift their hands to the sun disk but avert their eyes from each other. In one haunting scene, a loyal Aten priest stands before the great temple at dawn. The sun rises, the rays stretch down as always, but the courtyard is empty. No crowd, no offerings, just wind. He feels the enormity of a god without a people, a ritual without a congregation. Then, the unthinkable. Akhenaten dies. Whether by illness, exhaustion, or conspiracy, the heretic pharaoh who staked his life on a single god vanishes from the stage. Within days, the edifice he built begins to crack. Courtiers vanish. Soldiers switch allegiances. The Aten priests whisper of succession but have no army to enforce it. In Thebes, the counter-revolution ignites. Ammonius priests emerge from the shadows, reclaiming their temples, summoning old allies in the army. Statues of Ammonius are dug up from hidden caches. Festivals resume with feverish urgency. In the provinces, governors paint over Aten discs with the old god symbols. Back in Akhetaten, loyalists face an impossible choice. Some flee to Thebes and swear oaths to Ammonius to save their families. Others try to hold the city, but food runs short, pay stops, soldiers defect. Aten's open-air temples bake under the sun, empty as stage sets after a play. The reversal is swift and brutal. The new royal names, Smenkhare to Tankhaten, shift to Tutankhamun. The court relocates back to Memphis and Thebes. Edicts restore the old cults. Aten shrines are abandoned or rededicated. The White City in the desert becomes a ghost town. Damnatio Memoriae begins in earnest. Crews dispatched by the new government carve out Akhenaten's cartouches from monuments. His statues are toppled, his images smashed, his name omitted from king lists. In official records he is the enemy, or not mentioned at all. What took a decade to build is erased in months. Yet even in erasure there is ambiguity. Some of Akhenaten's reliefs are too deeply carved to remove completely. Faint outlines of Aten discs remain like pale scars on stone. Some workers, ordered to destroy, carve lightly so that future eyes might recover the images. Others hide small Aten amulets in tomb walls, a last act of defiance or faith. In the deserted city, a few hundred Aten loyalists linger. They keep small fires burning, sing hymns at dawn, hope for a return of royal patronage. But each week more slip away. The great temple's columns stand like ribs without a heart. Jackals prowl the outskirts at night. Sand drifts into open courtyards, burying unfinished inscriptions. Flashback to one of the first artisans who carved the Aten disc. He sits on a collapsed block, fingers tracing the rays of a half-erased relief. He whispers the great hymn one last time, then stands and walks toward the river, leaving his tools behind. He does not know if the Aten will survive, only that the city will not. Meanwhile in Thebes, Ammonius priests stage grand festivals. They carry the veiled bark of their god through crowded streets, incense rising in thick clouds. The people cheer louder than before, as if to drown out the memory of the heretic's experiment. For them, this is not just a restoration of tradition, but a victory over chaos, a reaffirmation of the cosmic order. But even as the old gods return, they face a changed Egypt. Soldiers who served in Akhetaten bring back strange hymns. Children named after Aten now learn to pray to Ammonius. Artisans trained in naturalism cannot forget what they've seen. The revolution may be dead, but its echoes still stir under the surface. Nefertiti disappears from the record. Smenkhare vanishes as quickly as he appeared. Tankhaten becomes Tutankhamun and, guided by advisors, presides over the restoration. Yet beneath the new order lies an unspoken awareness. They have erased not just a king, but a vision. And visions are harder to kill than men. We end on a slow pan across the abandoned city. White limestone walls glowing pink at sunset. Columns without roofs. Hymns carved into plaster flaking away under wind. A small clay Aten disc half buried in sand. In the distance, the Nile flows on, indifferent. But erasing a god is never simple. The white city of Akhetaten fades into a skeleton of stone, its once bright courtyards now haunted by jackals and drifting sand. In Memphis and Thebes, however, the drums roll again. Banners fly from Karnak's pylons. The old gods rise from their enforced silence. And at the center of this reversal stands not a hardened general or priest, but a boy barely old enough to hold a crook and flail. He is Tankhaten, the living image of the Aten, a child raised in the palace built on sunlight. He has watched his father, or uncle, Akhenaten pray to a god without statues, watched artisans carve elongated figures of his family into stone. He has seen the Aten temples gleam white under the desert sun. And now, still in his teens, he is crowned Pharaoh of Egypt. But the name he carries is dangerous. Every syllable invokes the god his court is trying to forget. Behind the golden masks and processions, advisors gather to decide the boy's future, and through him, Egypt's. Two men loom large. I, the veteran courtier who had served Amenhotep III and Akhenaten alike, and Hormheb, the army strongman, loyal to Egypt but not to the heretics' experiment. I knows the labyrinth of the court, its debts and alliances. Hormheb commands the soldiers who can either secure or topple the throne. Both see in Tutankhaten a blank tablet on which to write their restoration. Flashback to the boy's coronation in Thebes. Hymns to Ammonius fill the air. The veiled bark of the god glides past the crowd. Tutankhaten stands stiffly under a gilded canopy. Nefertiti absent, Smenkhare vanished, Akhenaten erased. The priests chant the old liturgies as if the last decade had been a bad dream. I whispers in the boy's ear, coaching each gesture, each response. Hormheb watches from the shadows, ensuring the army salutes at the right moment. Within months of his coronation, decrees begin to flow, but they do not sound like the voice of a boy. Temples to Ammonius are reopened. The priesthood restored. Aten's funding slashed. Workers ordered to stop building at Akhetaten and return to Thebes or Memphis. The royal residence relocates back to traditional centers. Tutankhaten's name quietly shifts to Tutankhamen, the living image of Ammonius. With that single change, Egypt symbolically reverses the Amarna Revolution. The erasure of Akhenaten's memory becomes state policy. Crews chisel his cartouche from stele. Royal lists skip his reign. Statues of Aten are recut into figures of Ammonius. Where Aten's rays once touched the royal family, new reliefs show traditional gods blessing the boy king. Tutankhamen himself is depicted offering to Ammonius, Horus, and Ptah, as though he had never known any other gods. In the palace, however, the boy feels the weight of contradictions. He was raised to see sunlight as sacred, the Aten as the one life-giver. Now he must preside over festivals to Ammonius, whose statues are hidden behind curtains. He watches I draft decrees in his name. He watches Hormheb reorganize the army, bringing veterans back from the neglected borders. He senses he is both king and hostage, the vessel for Egypt's return to tradition, but not its master. Flashback montage. I seated at a writing board late at night, composing orders in the boy's name. Hormheb drilling troops at dawn, reminding them who restored their pay. Priests carrying offerings into Ammonius' sanctuaries, chanting louder than before to reclaim the old power. And in the middle of it all, Tutankhamen, a teenager walking corridors lined with gods his father tried to erase, wondering which version of Egypt is real. As the restoration accelerates, so does the burial of evidence. The Aten temples are abandoned. Akhetaten becomes a quarry for building materials. Scribes instructed to destroy or hide Aten hymns. Tombs of Aten officials sealed or defaced. The counter-revolution is not just about religion, but about controlling memory, rewriting Egypt so that Akhenaten's decade becomes a footnote or a cautionary tale. Yet even in this purge, traces remain. Artisans trained in naturalism leave subtle touches in Tutankhamun's reliefs. A hand curved more naturally, a family scene glimpsed in a corner. Some of the boy's own inscriptions praise Aten as well as Ammonius, as though he cannot quite forget. Then comes the twist. Tutankhamun dies young, perhaps in an accident, perhaps from disease, perhaps from palace intrigue. His death leaves Ai and Hormheb to maneuver for the throne. The boy who restored the gods becomes the boy buried in haste, his legacy controlled by others. And his tomb? When Howard Carter opens it more than 3,000 years later, the world will call it the greatest archaeological discovery of all time. But even at the moment of discovery, scholars notice oddities. The tomb is small for a king. The murals rushed. The cartouche is altered. Some items seem originally made for someone else, perhaps Nefertiti, perhaps Smenkhare, perhaps even Akhenaten himself. Speculation grows. Was Tutankhamun's famous tomb a deliberate decoy? A quick burial to obscure the real resting places of Aten's royals? Did Ai or Hormheb hide the evidence of the heretic dynasty in deeper, undiscovered chambers, sealing away secrets of the Aten cult? Or was the tomb a compromise, giving the boy king a burial, but erasing the ideological traces of his upbringing? In this uncertainty lies the afterimage of the Amarna Revolution. Egypt restored the old gods, erased the heretic Pharaoh, and tried to forget the experiment. But Tutankhamun's tomb, glittering and anomalous, stands as a question mark at the end of that erasure. Inside the burial chamber, the boy's golden mask stares outward, serene and unreadable. On its brow both the vulture of Nekbet and the cobra of Wadjet, symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt, as if to claim unity even in death. Yet somewhere beneath the gold, a faint shadow of the sun disk lingers, the boy who once bore Aten in his name. Back in Thebes, I takes the throne briefly, then Hormheb seizes it, becoming the hammer of restoration. Aten is reduced to a minor aspect of Ra. The priests of Ammonius hold sway once again. Official history calls it a return to order, but in private, some still remember the sunlight of Akhetaten, the hymns to one god, the city without roofs. And so the story circles. A boy king raised in heresy becomes the instrument of its erasure. His name, changed from Aten to Ammonius, becomes the pivot point for a civilization's memory. His tomb becomes a riddle across millennia, a glittering echo of a revolution Egypt tried to annihilate. Because even in death, Tutankhamun cannot completely bury the Aten, and the questions left in his tomb still whisper of a god Egypt tried to erase. The desert sleeps, but it does not forget. 3,000 years after Akhenaten's streets fell silent, archaeologists kneel in the same dust where masons once carved sun disks. Brushes flick over limestone chips. Ground-penetrating radar hums. In these fragments, the city's ghost rises again. The Amarna letters, hundreds of clay tablets preserved by chance, speak in the voices of kings and envoys who lived through Akhenaten's revolution. Send troops, they plead. Send gold. Send chariots. Their wedge-shaped cuneiform script reads like dispatches from a slow-motion collapse, each line a pulse of the hidden war. They are the first direct evidence of international diplomacy, and they place Akhenaten's Egypt not as an isolated utopia, but as an empire under strain, struggling to hold its world together. DNA analysis deepens the mystery. Mummy after mummy from the Valley of the Kings has been tested, their genomes unraveling like papyri. Results hint at tangled kinships. Tutankhamun as the son of Akhenaten or his brother, Nefertiti perhaps hidden under another name, Smenkhkare's bloodline uncertain. Each revelation complicates the story rather than resolves it, showing how far the official erasures went to bury the Amarna family tree. New scans of tombs in the Valley of the Kings reveal ghost corridors and hidden chambers, blank spaces behind Tutankhamun's walls, tantalizing shapes that could be storerooms or sealed shrines. Some researchers whisper about undiscovered royal burials from the Amarna period, caches of Aten cult treasures sealed away by Ai or Hormheb, still waiting under the limestone. Others caution that the ghost chambers may be nothing at all. The mystery persists, as if the desert is playing a game with modern eyes. In museums from Cairo to Berlin, fragments of Amarna art hold their strange power. A hand holding an ink, a child's face under the rays of the sun disk, a hymn carved into a limestone block reading, "You rise beautiful in the horizon of heaven." These pieces survived centuries of iconoclasm, smuggling their message across millennia. Speculative but grounded questions linger. Did Akhenaten's revolution echo in later monotheisms? The idea of one god, universal and invisible, worshipped without images. The emphasis on moral order rather than temple ritual. The personal, intimate relationship with the divine. Scholars debate fiercely. Some see a faint line connecting Akhenaten to Hebrew theology during the period of the Exodus. Others dismiss it as coincidence. But the possibility hovers, a ghost of influence, a shared whisper across cultures. Another question, was the erasure of Akhenaten a political necessity or a theological cover-up? Did Egypt's elite fear his monotheism because it threatened the priesthood's wealth, or because it destabilized the cosmic order itself? Was he a dangerous fanatic or a visionary centuries ahead of his time? In Akhetaten's ruins, emotional complexity hangs as heavy as the heat. It's easy to frame Akhenaten as a failed tyrant who upended tradition and left chaos. But the fragments tell another story, of a man who gambled everything on a single truth, who tried to carve a window in the stone of history through which sunlight might pour. Memory flash back to the image we started with. Akhenaten walking at dusk through the unfinished city, the Aten disk blazing above him. A prince raised in the shadow of 1,000 gods, now staking his reign on one. Around him, workers carve hymns, priests seethe, generals defect. He knows the cost. He proceeds anyway. Modern viewers see the same gamble reflected in the city's ruins. Each column without a roof, each abandoned house, each erased cartouche is a reminder of how fragile revolutions are. Yet the very survival of Akhenaten's ruins, the Amarna letters, and Tutankhamun's tomb also show that erasure is never perfect. Memory leaks through cracks. Emotional crescendo. Imagine Akhenaten not as a heretic but as a bridge between polytheism and monotheism, between hidden gods and open sky, between ritual control and personal devotion. He fails politically, but in failing he plants an idea so strange it will echo long after his name is forgotten. This is why Akhenaten endures. Not because of power, he lost that. Not because of monuments, they were erased. But because the attempt itself still shines. A human being standing in the desert, saying there is only one light, one life, one source. The camera pulls back from the ruins of Amarna to a wider view of the modern Nile Valley. Villages clustered along the banks. Farmers still rising with the sun. Children running barefoot past fragments of columns carved with rays of light. The past is not gone. It is sediment layered under their feet. And then this spotlight into darkness moment. How many other chapters of history were edited, buried, or rewritten before reaching us? How many revolutions erased from king lists? How many prophets forgotten? How many experiments in faith lost beneath the sand? What we call history may be only the curated surface, a version someone allowed to survive. The screen fades from sunlight to shadow, from Aten's rays to a torchlight beam scanning hieroglyphs in a dark tomb corridor. Dust swirls. The sound of a brush against limestone. A faint outline of a sun disk emerges where an ancient chisel tried to erase it. Because history may be written by the victors, but the desert keeps its own archive. And sometimes, across millennia, it whispers the names of those who tried to change the world.